Going on, my brother? How are you?
Oh, good, man. How are you?
Good, I'm good. I guess we have 1 minute before we get started. See, we
Yeah,
have
yeah.
somebody in here, Brother Ahmed. What's going on, Brother Ahmed? Trust you are well.
Do we have any people
Doing
on,
good,
on, on
man.
YouTube?
Right now, let's see. We do have, well, I think we lost some because of the waiting, but we will get started, and I'm sure people will jump in and jump on.
Okay, it's already 5 o'clock.
Let's go.
Okay. Welcome to our fourth installment of the Black History Month lecture series, which is sponsored by the African Center for the Study of the United States. The center, which was established in 2018, is dedicated in bridging the gaps between Africans in the diaspora and Africans here at home. So today we have one of our own, Dr. Asad, who's going to give us a presentation on the topic of African American Islam. Dr. Asad is manager of the Diaspora Project here at the center. He's a researcher and lecturer from New Orleans. He's a graduate from Dillard University, and he earned his PhD in intercultural relations from Columbia University. Without further delay, Mr. Asad, Dr. Asad, let me pass the ball to you.
Thank you, my brother. Thank you, my brother. I'm excited, man, and I won't take any more time, and we will get started immediately with
Okay.
the topic. I see we have a few guests here. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Got it. So uh let's get into it. So African American Islam. So African American religious practices are most closely associated with the Christian religion. Indeed, most African Americans identify as Christian, with the vast majority adhering to a Protestant belief. About 3% of African Americans identify as Muslim, making up about 20% of the entire American Muslim population. However, despite their current size, African American Muslims have played a disproportionate role in the African American community, influencing both American Christian practices as well as secular subcultures like hip hop. The story of African American Muslims is as old as the story of African Americans. While there are conflicting estimates on the number of enslaved West Africans who were Muslim, the range is between about 500,000 and 900,000 of the nearly 12.5 million human beings that were captured during the transatlantic slave trade. However, after a deliberate mission by the Christian owners, African Americans slowly lost touch with their Islamic religion. With a few notable exceptions, Islam had all but disappeared from the African American psyche until a revival in the early to mid 1900s. However, when it reappears in the African American community, it has taken on a quite a different materialization. Islam became the protest religion of African Americans that saw the Christian church that portrayed God and all of his heavenly host as white. To many Christianity was simply the white man's religion. No man embodied the rejection of that religion better than the man pictured here, Elijah Muhammad, born Elijah Poole, and he was the leader of the Nation of Islam. And I will just discuss his role in that organization that he built later on in this presentation. So I started writing about African American Islam back in 2014, and it culminated with the release of my book entitled Bismillah and Bean Pies: How Black Americans Crafted an Islamic Expression Through Nationalism. To explain the title a bit, Bismillah is an Arabic expression that translates to "with the name of God." It is often said as a quick blessing. For example, if I go to a restaurant to eat, right before I eat, I will say Bismillah as a way of kind of blessing the food. Bean pies, on the other hand, is a dish that comes from the African American Muslim community, in particular, the Nation of Islam, whom we will learn again more about later. The bean pie in many ways symbolizes the unique expression of Islam created in the African American community. No other Muslim community in the world can lay claim to this dish in the same way that no other Muslim community in the world expresses Islam in the way African Americans express Islam. So, today I will address how African Americans crafted their unique Islamic expression. This includes a brief history of the early Muslims in the United States and key figures that played a significant role in the revival of Islam and the African American consciousness. Secondly, I will discuss the themes that helped shape the African American Islamic expression and discuss how this expression differs from other Islamic communities. However, I will not discuss faith, right? I will not discuss nor debate the tenets of the Islamic faith or any other. Yes, I am a Muslim, but I am not speaking today in that capacity. I am speaking today in the capacity of a researcher and a scholar of culture and religion. So and if you guys don't mind, if you can mute your mics for me, I would greatly appreciate that. To understand the story of African American Islam, we must start before the transatlantic slave trade. In West Africa, long before the Europeans arrived, Muslims were an important and visible part of the cultural fabric of many nations. Of those Africans who arrived in the United States, nearly half came from two regions, Senegambia, the area comprising the Senegal and Gambia rivers and the land between them, or today's Senegal, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, and Mali, and West Central Africa, including what is now Angola, Congo, Dr. Congo, and Gabon. Most of these regions had major Muslim populations, and this still holds true today. For example, today in Senegal is 96% Muslim, Mali is 92% Muslim, Guinea is 82% Muslim, the Ivory Coast is 37% Muslim, Nigeria is nearly 50% Muslim. Many of these enslaved African Muslims brought Islam to the Americas. The first people to call the Adhan, or the call to prayer, the first people to make Salat or to observe Ramadan in the New World were enslaved African Muslims. So I always like to give fascinating stories. So one of the most fascinating stories in the African American Muslim narrative is that of this Fulani prince named Abdul Rahman Ibrahim. Born in 1760 in Guinea, he was captured and sold into slavery in the United States. Prior to enslavement, he was likely educated at Timbuktu. He was well versed in the Quran, and he could speak several languages, including Arabic. Once captured, he was taken to New Orleans, right? Which at that time was the Walmart of slavery. And they call it the Walmart of slavery because you could get every type of enslaved person that you desired. Eventually, he was sold up the river to Natchez, Mississippi, where he became respected on the plantation by both his owner and other enslaved Africans. One day, while he was in a market, Ibrahim was recognized by a white man named Dr. Cox. By a strange twist of fate, Cox had known Ibrahim when he was a prince in West Africa. See, Ibrahim's family had nursed Cox back to health after Cox became ill on a trip to Guinea. Cox loved and admired Ibrahim and his family for saving his life. And now in a market in Mississippi, he meets Ibrahim again, and this time as an enslaved person. So Cox attempted to buy Ibrahim's freedom. He even enlisted the assistance of the governor of Mississippi. However, Ibrahim's owners refused to sell him. Once Cox died, his son took up the cause to liberate Ibrahim. They tried many channels. And on the behest of the editor of a newspaper, Ibrahim wrote a letter in perfect Arabic. Because the letter was written in Arabic, many thought Ibrahim was Moroccan. His letter eventually ended up in the hands of the Sultan of Morocco, who negotiated Ibrahim's freedom. However, Ibrahim's children were still enslaved. So in order to raise money to free his children to buy their freedom, Ibrahim, who had become something of a celebrity, engaged in a speaking tours across various cities in the United States. He was billed or advertised as the Moroccan Prince. I mentioned this Moroccan Prince title as Ibrahim's story would have an impact on another proto-Islamic organization called the Moorish Science Temple, which I will discuss later. While Ibrahim was celebrated individually, for many white American slave owners, Islam and Muslims were seen as a threat. They believed a common language, Arabic, and a unifying faith, Islam, was a recipe for insurrection and rebellion. Because of this, many Muslims had to conceal their faith and openly confess some form of Christianity. For example, Abdul Rahman Ibrahim was asked to prove his Christian faith by writing the Lord's Prayer. Ibrahim resourcefully wrote the first surah or the first chapter of the Quran called Al-Fatiha. The white Americans could not read or write Arabic and they had no idea. But that is some of the lengths African-American Muslims had to go to continue their faith as well as conceal their faith. After the importation of new Africans in 1807, Islam becomes less and less prevalent in the African-American population. Islam becomes as foreign to third-generation African-Americans as the New World was to their parents. It would be a century before the reemergence of Islam in the African-American community. To understand the reemergence of Islam in the African-American community, we must understand the themes that run through the core of its development. When Islamic ideals start reverberating in the African-American community in the early 1900s, it was because of these themes. Firstly, Islam was seen as a protest against the Christian church, which was inextricably tied to white supremacy and slavery. For example, the white terrorist organization known as the Ku Klux Klan, responsible for the death of thousands of Black Americans, identified itself as a Christian organization. In addition, the Bible was weaponized and misused against African Americans by cherry-picking passages such as slave, obey your slave master. Thus, Islam offers a religious system to push back or protest against the perversion of white American Christianity. The second theme is Afrocentricity. For reasons we will discuss momentarily, Islam becomes linked with Afrocentricity. It is sold to African Americans as the religion of your forefathers and the religion of the African. This is coupled with the third theme of nationalism. Islam is presented to African Americans as the means and method to rebuild a Black nation, either in the United States or abroad. And finally, Islam is presented as the path of improving the self. These themes, protest to Christianity, Afrocentricity, nationalism, and the self make up the foundation of African-American Islamic development. And this quote by Brother Malcolm embodies that. He says, our success in America will involve two circles, Black nationalism and Islam. It will take Black nationalism to make our people conscious of doing for self, and then Islam will provide the spiritual guidance. Black nationalism will link us to Africa, and Islam will link us spiritually to Africa, Arabia, and Asia. And again, we can see the themes that I identified throughout that quote. So how do these themes develop? These two men can be held responsible for linking these themes. I am sure everyone is familiar with the man on the right, the Honorable Marcus Garvey. In the 20th century, this Jamaican-born U.S. immigrant amassed a following of African Americans in the hundreds of thousands in his organization, the United Negro Improvement Association. Garvey was to be to African Americans what Moses was to be to the biblical Israelites. In fact, he was given the nickname Moses. But before Garvey was this great Pan-African leader, he was a student of the man on the left, Duse Muhammad Ali. When Garvey was 20 years old, he traveled to London, where he came under the tutelage of Ali. Ali was a half Egyptian, half Sudanese Muslim. He was an African nationalist, and he was the owner of the African Times newspaper, which he used to promote the ideas of nationalism. Garvey was greatly influenced by Ali's brand of African Islamic nationalism. According to research by Ivan Hadid and Joseph Esposito in their work Muslims on the Americanization Path, Duce's influence on Garvey is attested to by his wife Amy, and can be seen in the UNIA's motto, One God, which is a very Islamic theme, one aim, one destiny, and various Islamically inspired anthems and of the organization. When Garvey returned to Jamaica from London, he is now shaped by the Pan-Africanism, the nationalism, and Islam that he saw, which was the religion that unified many of the African intellectuals he met in London. Once Garvey makes it to the United States, the UNIA grows exponentially, and Garvey seizes the moment. Garvey created retail businesses, factories, laundries, and restaurants. However, one of the most important things Garvey and the UNIA did was the creation of a religion specifically for Black people. God, the Messiah, angels, all the rituals were cast in a specific Afrocentric light. Garvey understood the religious nature of African Americans and their need to be connected to a religious practice. The power of Garvey's movement was to bridge nationalism, religion, and Pan-Africanism. Much like Duse Muhammad Ali had blended Islam with nationalism, Richard Brent Turner, in his book Islam and the African American Experience, states that Garvey intended to establish a Black civil religion with an ethos and worldview drawn from the tradition of the Black church, yet charged with the self-consciousness of Black nationalism. Ali's influence on Garvey included Garvey incorporating Islamic themes into the organization. For example, one of the UNIA's official hymns was entitled Allahu Akbar, which is Arabic for God is great. Garvey would often reference the Prophet Muhammad. In one speech, Garvey states that as Muhammad had done for the religious world, the UNIA would do in leading Black people towards the path of liberty. While Garvey never became a Muslim, and he probably only saw the religion as a means to an end, his inclusion of the faith left fertile ground for future African American Islamic leaders to plant the idea of Islam. Said differently, Garvey exposed his thousands of followers to the possibility of an alternative to Christianity. He introduced many of them to the words Allah and the word Muhammad. Remember that Garvey's followers were nationalists. They were Pan-Africanists who had been exposed to the idea of Islam. And it is from this crop of people the African American Islamic expression begins to evolve. In Garvey, we find the embodiment of the themes, a protest to Christianity, or the white American version of it, Afrocentricity, nationalism, and the reliance on self. In 1920, an Indian man migrated to the United States with the sole purpose of converting Americans to Islam. He traveled to Philadelphia, New York, Detroit, and Chicago, where white Christians in these cities rejected his Islamic teachings. He found a listening ear with the African American community, many of whom had recently moved from the Deep South to northern cities in a movement that American historians call the Great Migration. This man was Mufti Muhammad Sadiq from the Ahmadiyya Islamic sect. The Ahmadiyya are a controversial sect of Muslims whose beliefs often conflict with orthodoxy. This is important to note as the formation of African American Islam often clashed with Orthodox teachings, perhaps influenced by the Ahmadiyya. Sadiq cleverly noticed the downtrodden condition of African Americans and did not approach his missionary work by simply discussing scripture. Rather, he sought to sell Islam as a route to uplifting the entire African American race from its lowly position. In 1921, Sadiq established a newspaper called the Muslim Sunrise. He often printed editorials directly aimed at African Americans. He presented Islam as a protest to the failures of Christianity. One such quote in the Muslim Sunrise is this one here that you guys see on your screen. He says, my dear African Americans, Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you and the mercy of Allah. The Christian profiteers brought you out of your native lands of Africa, and in Christianizing you, made you forget the religion and the language of your forefathers, which were Islam and Arabic. You have experienced Christianity for so many years, and it has proved to be no good. It is a failure. Christianity cannot bring brotherhood to man, especially to a fallen and downtrodden nation. I mean, if that is not a Christian protest, right, or a protest against Christianity, I don't know what is. So now leave it alone. Join Islam, the real faith of universal brotherhood, which at once does away with all distinctions of race, color, and creed. The Holy Quran is the true book of God. You need a religion that teaches manliness. Now watch this self. Here's the self-reliance, self-respect, and self-effort. Within this quote, we find elements of all of the themes: Christian protest, Afrocentricity, nationalism, and he identified three selves, right? Self-reliance, self-respect, self-effort. We will see these themes over and over again as we discuss the development of African American Islam. So it is important to note that Muhammad Sadiq, along with others in the African American Islamic experience, were politically connected to Garvey and mentioned him frequently in the Muslim Sunrise and in other writings. So Sadiq tailored his messages to appeal to the Garveyites and similar people in the African American community. But Sadiq and the Ahmadiyya's greatest contribution to African American Islam was the distributing of English language versions of the Quran. The Ahmadiyya had success in converting thousands of African Americans to Islam, and many of those were Garveyites. They were Pan-African. They were Black nationalists, and they already believed in doing for self, right? However, this conversion was not without problems. While the group professed to believe in the equality of all men, African American converts were never given any leadership position. They were kind of viewed as second-class reverts in the community. Furthermore, the Ahmadiyya missionaries insisted on following Indian customs and interpretations of the faith and did not recognize the power and importance of African American culture. Because of this kind of substitute supremacy, replacing the European with the Indian, many African Americans called for a new, explicitly Black understanding of Islam. The problems that arose in the Ahmadiyya sect gave birth to the question: how do African Americans create an Islamic expression that is both relevant to the Black experience and true to the core tenets of Islam? This essentially became a debate between universalism and particularism. Edward Curtis, the author of several books on Islam in Black America, theorized the idea of this Black particularism, right, in Islam. The idea is in contrast to universalism, or the belief that Islam is an all-encompassing faith that has eliminated the need for an individual prescription for different groups of adherents. Universalism suggests that Islam in Pakistan and Islam in Chicago should be expressed and experienced identically by these very different groups of Muslims. So, in many ways, universalism is far too simplistic and insufficient to address the unique concerns of nearly 2 billion adherents to the faith. To further complicate things, in the greater Islamic world, faith, culture, and nationality are often intertwined. For example, Pakistan is nearly 97% Muslim. So when one says, I am Pakistani, in many ways, they are also saying, I am Muslim. Thus, universalism created a difficult task for African Americans as they awakened from centuries of religious hibernation and attempted to reconnect with the greater Muslim world. Conversely, particularism often strayed so far away from the tenets of the faith that Islam became unrecognizable in their rituals, customs, and practices. It became peculiar. It is from this ideological dichotomy that African American Islamic organizations such as the Moorish Science Temple and the Nation of Islam arose. This man, right, Noble Drew Ali, who was born Timothy Drew, was probably the first to create an African American Islamic organization that was explicitly particular, right? His organization was the Moorish Science Temple. Noble Drew Ali was a merchant seaman. He visited Egypt. It was in Egypt that he said he passed a pyramid test and was given the title of Noble Drew Ali. Richard Dannon, in his work Black Pilgrimage to Islam, theorized that the pyramid test was actually an initiation into the Masonic fraternity. Dannon points out the many similar practices of the Masons and the Moorish Science Temple. Nevertheless, Drew Ali branded his organization as Islamic. Ali found success in converting African Americans in Chicago, Detroit, and New York, some of the same cities that the Ahmadiyya found success. Ali wrote his own Quran. Now, this Quran had nothing to do with the Quran that the rest of the Muslim world used. Felicia Mayakawa, in her work 5% of Rap, God Hop Music, Message, and Black Muslims, states that Ali's Quran draws heavily on the legacy of classical Black nationalism, right? And teaches a path of spiritual enlightenment based on Christian Gnostic, Masonic, and Islamic doctrines. Ali had taken particularism into the land of the very peculiar as it relates to an Islamic expression. Now, if you remember earlier in this talk, I talked about Abdul Rahman Ibrahim, the Moroccan prince, right? Ali picked up on this Moroccan theme and labeled members of his organization as Moors. He said their nationality was Moorish. He gave his followers a nationality. No longer were they simply the children of former slaves, void of history. They were now Moors, a designation that came with a homeland, a history, and a religion, Islam. While the Moorish Science Temple was a far cry from Orthodox Islam, it appears that Ali was familiar with some of the universal practices of the faith, such as praying towards Mecca, abstaining from alcohol and pork, and observing the Sabbath on Friday. Ali had little to no contact with Orthodox Islamic practices after leaving Egypt, nor did he have access to a real Quran or other Islamic materials. It appears that from sheer will, he brought into an existence an Islamic expression that led Bible-based and heavily churched Black people into a new religious experience that was replete with a Quran and an idea of Islam. Ali's Moorish Science Temple again follows this theme, the themes. It was a protest against Christianity. It was Afrocentric in nature. And by giving his followers a nationality, he continued to example the theme of nationalism. The very first slide of this presentation featured this man, Elijah Poole, later known as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. There can be no serious discussion on the topic of African American Islam without discussing Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. No other man has had a longer lasting impact on the African American community as a whole than Elijah Muhammad. Now, that may seem like a grandiose kind of statement. So I will put it this way. If we look at the two most prominent African American leaders, Dr. Martin Luther King and Brother Malcolm X, their public life was much shorter than Elijah Muhammad's. Said differently, when Elijah Muhammad took over the Nation of Islam in 1934, Dr. Martin Luther King was 5 years old and Brother Malcolm was 9. When Elijah Muhammad died in 1975, King had been dead 7 years and Brother Malcolm had been dead for a decade. Elijah Muhammad's students, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Imam Warfdi Muhammad, and Louis Farrakhan are considered some of the greatest men Black America has ever produced. His brand of Islam forever changed Black America and mainstreamed the idea of African American Muslims. But essentially, the Nation of Islam, his organization, must be viewed as an ideological and organizational offspring of Marcus Garvey's UNIA, the Moorish Science Temple, and the traditional Black church. This combination created a Christo-Islamic hybrid that was nationalistic, Bible-based, and kind of used the Quran and Islam as supplements. But how does this Nation of Islam form, right? In 1930, a man named Wallace Farad, later known as Master Farad Muhammad, started teaching a theology in the slums of Black Detroit that he called Islam. Farad's origins are often debated. The Nation of Islam's official narrative is that he came from Mecca. Other researchers like Dr. Fatima believe that he was a member of the Ahmadiyya, with the Ahmadiyya sect, and was from India or Pakistan. Yet others believe he was born in Texas and he was biracial, and there are actually documents that support that claim. While Farad appeared in the Black communities of Detroit, he did not explicitly teach Islam. Instead, he was a silk salesman that told his customers of their glorious history in their past and their ancestors in Africa. He did not use the Quran. Instead, he used the Bible. Farad used the Bible and Christianity as his base and kind of coded his teachings with Islam. This was, in fact, very similar to the way medieval Indian Muslims had propagated the faith to Hindu communities. His teachings were critical of white society and the racism it promoted. Eventually, the fame of this silk peddler spread throughout Detroit and Chicago, and African Americans began to convert by the thousands. It is estimated that from 1930 to 1934, between 5,000 and 8,000 African Americans joined Farad's Nation of Islam. Farad's message was potent. It was nuanced, and it was tailored to the condition of Blacks arriving from the Southern United States. He crafted a particularism that would soon become the most recognizable expression of Islam in the United States. Farad's teaching on the nature of the different races was what separated him from his predecessors, like Noble Drew Ali and Marcus Garvey. Farad taught explicitly that the Black man was God and that white men were devils. Black Americans had never heard a philosophy that so completely elevated Black people and diminished whites. Now, this must be contextualized. This is 1930. Blacks were only 75 years from the end of slavery. They had been taught for centuries that they were less than human. They were being lynched nearly once a week. and imprisoned for crimes like loitering, which allowed them to be leased out to plantations in a process called convict leasing, essentially enslaving them again. They had suffered some of the most inhumane treatment in the history of humanity, and all of it came by the hands of white Americans. It is easy to see how Farad's doctrine resonated with these people. Hell was not some place that the sinner goes when he dies. Hell was the place that Black Americans had been catching it, America, and it was the devil who had been issuing it out, and that was the white man, according to.
I'm going to go in the other room.
I ask you guys to please mute. Thank you very much. Farad's organization took Christian protest religion to new heights. The Nation of Islam rejected and withdrew from the American social structure. The organization expressed its sovereignty by declaring itself a nation within a nation. The Nation of Islam had its own flag, its own military, its own national regions, and just like every other nation, it had its own cuisine, including that bean pie that I talked about earlier. So Elijah Poole was born in Sandersville, Georgia. This is a small rural town. To put it into perspective, Sandersville's population in 2020 was 5,000 people. So we can imagine what the town was like in 1897 when Elijah was born. His father was a minister at Zion Hope Baptist Church. As a child, Elijah was troubled by many of the experiences he had in the church, including the narratives and the ideas of hell. The world that shaped Elijah's childhood was filled with terror attacks by the Ku Klux Klan. He lived in a time of growing racial hostility marked by lynch mobs and daily fear of white aggression. At the age of 10, Elijah witnessed the lynching of an 18-year-old that he had known. He felt pain for the loss of the young man, but even more, he felt ashamed because the Blacks in the community did not do anything to stop it or retaliate. Between 1914 and 1924, a series of factors forced thousands of Blacks to leave the rural South. An uptick in lynchings, a boll weevil infestation, and the outbreak of World War I, which led to the creation of industrial jobs in the North, forced Blacks into the Great Migration. By 1933, Elijah was married with children, and he relocated to Detroit. The North had proved to be just as racist and hostile as the South. And this prompted many in the Black community to join organizations like Marcus Garvey's UNIA, and Elijah Muhammad was no different. He was a member of the UNIA, but at the time that he joined, the organization was in peril. Garvey had been arrested and was facing deportation back to Jamaica, and the organization was in the process of falling apart. Later, he joined the all-Black ancient Egyptian order of the nobles of the mystic shrine of North and South America. This was a Black Freemason organization. In 1931, Elijah attends his first meeting of the Nation of Islam to hear Farad Muhammad speak. He was convinced that Farad's message was the truth, and he became a faithful follower. Soon, he became second in command. In 1934, Farad disappeared, and this is still a mystery. No one knows where he went. Nevertheless, Elijah took over the Nation of Islam, and for the next 45 years, he created an organization that was truly particular and in many ways peculiar. In his teachings, Black nationalism, Christianity, and Islam converged. Under Elijah's leadership, the Bible and the Quran were used almost interchangeably, at least at times. Members were taught to pray 5 times daily facing Mecca, although not in the traditional form of Orthodox Islam Salat, right? Members were forbidden to gamble, to drink, to eat pork. The Nation of Islam also had a month of fasting, but not during the traditional month of Ramadan, but during December. Elijah said that they must fast during December to keep them from participating in Christmas celebrations. During Elijah's reign, the Nation of Islam grew into a nationwide structure, including schools, international import businesses, bakeries, office buildings, print shops, newspapers, barbershops, clothing stores, farms, trucking companies, and restaurants. All Black owned, all Black operated, with the theme of doing for self, right? Furthermore, the Nation of Islam specialized in taking men that found themselves on the wrong side of the law, or who were drunkards, or who were deadbeat fathers, and turning them into pillars of the community. This gained them many followers and even more admirers. Black communities across America were proud when a group of Muslims moved in, because it meant that their streets might be cleaner and safer, businesses would be created, and children would have examples of clean-cut, well-mannered, and disciplined men and women. Yet the most important thing Elijah Muhammad did was to raise up mouthpieces, or as he called them, students. Malcolm X, who would later lead the organization, Muhammad Ali, Imam Wharfdeen Muhammad, and Louis Farrakhan, all at one point were household names in the United States. So we're coming to an end now. In 1975, Elijah Muhammad died, and his son Imam Wharfdeen Muhammad, pictured here on the right, became the leader of the organization. Now, Imam Wharfdeen Muhammad had studied Orthodox Islam, and he knew that his father's teachings were not in line with traditional Islam. He swiftly began to change the Nation of Islam and move the organization towards Orthodox Islam. Gone were the teachings that the white man was the devil and the Black man was God. He dismantled the military wing of the organization, the Fruit of Islam. He instructed members to make salat in the same way as the rest of the Muslim world. He instructed that they fast during the month of Ramadan with the rest of the Muslim world. He changed the name of the organization from the Nation of Islam to the World Community of Islam, and later to the American Society of Muslims. By 2002, a year before Imam Wharfdeen Muhammad died, the American Society of Muslims had nearly 2.5 million members from every ethnic group and race, Black and white alike. Imam Wharfdeen Muhammad had taken African American Muslims from the edge of particularism or the peculiar into the fold of traditional Islam. However, this rapid change did not sit well with all. In 1977, Louis Farrakhan broke away from the World Community of Islam, and he revived the Nation of Islam and the original teachings of the Nation of Islam. He rejected Imam Wharfdeen Muhammad's embrace of traditional Islamic practices. Farrakhan also grew strong in popularity, both inside and outside of Muslim communities. He was often vilified by American mainstream media, who saw the teachings of the Nation of Islam as radical, racist, and anti-Semitic, and dangerous. Yet he was beloved, even if privately, by many African Americans. So much so that in 1995, he called for 1 million Black men to march on Washington, D.C. And based on the estimates from the Center of Remote Sensing at Boston University, between 870,000 and 1.1 million men showed up. To prove his popularity, Farrakhan called for another million-man march 20 years later in 2015 and drew nearly the same numbers. So after nearly 30 years of estrangement, Imam Wharfdeen Muhammad and Minister Louis Farrakhan reunited in a show of solidarity in the early 2000s. Two men that represented two different versions or visions of Islam once again embraced as brothers. And this is where we are today as African American Muslims. We are one family with two sides, one orthodox and one particular. But through it all, it is the themes of Afrocentricity, nationalism, Christian protest, and the ideas of doing for self that binds both communities. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Dr. Asad, for such an insightful presentation. Thank you very much. That was very much insightful. I was wondering if any of our guests have any questions to pose.
Right, I'll see if there are any questions on the YouTube. Let's see. Well, if not, do you have any questions, my brother?
Yes, of course, Dr. Asad. So the first one would be, what separates African American Islamic expression from other Islamic expressions in other Muslim communities?
Interesting. So I think what separates African American Islam from other Islamic communities is that it is nationalism. It is Afrocentricity. That is the way we come to Islam. I often hear. I recall reading a YouTube comment that talked about the East African slave trade and how Muslims were responsible for the slave trade, and indeed they were. We know that Black Americans come through Christianity, particularly through the transatlantic slave trade. They were Christianized. However, we as African American Muslims don't come to Islam from any type of tyranny, right? There's no slave trade that brought African American Islam that helped it to develop. It was missionaries as well as organizations like the UNIA, and so the root of African American Islam in many ways is is free of all of the baggage of many of the other Islamic communities. We don't come as culturally Muslim. We're culturally Black. We're culturally African American. But we view our faith, and we view our faith through that prism.
Thank you, Dr. Asad, for that. Another question would be, is there any impact that African American Islam have on the African American community as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have Brother Malcolm, and I didn't go directly to Elijah Muhammad because Brother Malcolm was far more known and popular. And they have movies about Brother Malcolm and his impact. I tell you, during Barack Obama's first presidential campaign, there was a controversy that he found himself involved in, and it was with his pastor, Dr. Jeremiah Wright. Dr. Jeremiah Wright from Trinity United Methodist Church taught Black liberation theology. It is a pro-Black, Afrocentric form of Christianity. The architect of Black liberation theology, the founder, the thought genius behind Black liberation theology was Dr. James Cone. May he rest in peace. And Dr. James Cone crafted Black liberation theology as a direct response to the liberating theology of the Nation of Islam and Brother Malcolm X. Cone was a fan and a follower of Brother Malcolm, yet he was a Christian. And in his mind, the Christian church did not have a response to the type of racism and white supremacy that Black Americans experienced. And they did not have a response to the liberating Islamic doctrine of the Nation of Islam. So he crafted Black liberation theology. I mean, if we look at hip hop music, right? Rakim Allah, right? He changed the way people rap. There's influences when you hear there was a song by the Poor Righteous Teachers, you know, in the golden era of hip hop, and they said "Assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum assalam," the universal greetings of the brothers of our kind. The influence of hip hop the influence of Islam on hip hop can really be seen as through another proto-Islamic organization called the Nation of Gods and Earths. The Nation of Gods and Earths was founded by a man named Clarence 13X. And Clarence 13X was a member of the Nation of Islam. However, some say he liked to drink, he liked to gamble, so he could not maintain his membership. And so what he did, he created another organization called the Nation of Gods and Earths, which used, again, the teachings from the Nation of Islam, but they did not have the same level of discipline, or I don't want to say the label. They removed some of the rules and regulations. They were allowed to drink, they were allowed to gamble, or whatever have you. And you find that many in the hip hop community are members of the Nation of Gods and Earths, particularly those who come from New York. We've seen Jay-Z wear the Nation of Gods and Earths #7 logo, and many other hip hop artists. Hip hop artists. I see, Brother Sandili, you have a question. You have to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear
All right,
me?
brother. Yes, I can hear you well.
Yeah, I've got issues with my network here. But I asked a similar question on the YouTube chat. Maybe you might have missed it. But what I wanted to find out is that in your opening, you spoke about how Islam has always been part of the fabric society of the West Africans, right? That's what you said.
Yes. Yes.
Um, But my question then would be, how come that the indigenous languages never filtered through in the religion? Even the characters that are found in Islam, none of the local indigenous West African languages can be picked out.
Yeah, I
That is
mean,
my question.
it's quite, and that's a wonderful question, brother. Thank you. I think it's quite simple. Unlike maybe the Christian church, where if you go to Latin America, the church service or will be in Spanish, or in the United States will be in English. Arabic is inextricably linked to Islam. We pray in Arabic. We even say you're not really reading the Quran until you read it in Arabic. So if you read it in English language translation, you're reading the Quran, but you're not reading the Quran really. So the importance of Arabic, and it's important because Arabic is the language that the Quran in our faith practice, right, is to be preserved, right? We believe that God wanted to preserve the Quran in Arabic. So it becomes paramount that Arabic be learned, as well as maybe, so when people convert, or West Africans, they may speak their native tongue, they may speak Wolof, or whatever have you, but as it relates to their religious practices, Arabic will be that language. So yeah, I think that's why you don't see like West African languages kind of influencing Islam, or you won't see any other languages influencing Islam for the most part. I guess Farsi has its influence, and for American and English speaking converts or reverts, English has its influence. But again, when we pray, we must pray in Arabic. When we perform certain rituals, it's an Arabic thing. Calling the name of Allah is an Arabic thing. So I think it's what Arabic means so central to the religion, it is impossible for another language group to find any real estate to in the faith. Any other questions, comments, concerns? I see we do have a lot of stuff in the chat on YouTube, so let's see. One brother said that religion is the deification of people's culture. Therefore, religion empowers people in whose culture the religion is expressed. I'm glad to have come through the Nation of Islam before becoming to mainstream Al-Islam. So that's a brother named Blackfish And what he is saying is that coming through uh, the Nation of Islam gives Black Americans a very unique understanding of Islam, right? It, it was once asked, why study African American Islam? Because the study of African American Islam is truly the study of Black nationalism and Pan-Africanism, right? Because that's the way we come through. That's the way we come to the faith. We don't come to the faith by any cultural means. While there were missionaries like Muhammad Sadiq, we created our own expression of Islam, and it was again through that crop of people from Marcus Garvey's UNIA and those people who were Garveyites, who were already Pan-African, who were already Black nationalists, who were already Afrocentric. Islam, really, the study of African American Islam is secondary. It is the study of Black nationalism, the study of Pan-Africanism and Afrocentricity. Any other questions?
Well, the last question from me, Dr. Asad, would be, why is it important to study African American Islam?
Well, again, as I just mentioned, if any study on Black nationalism or African American Black nationalism, you have to study African American Islam. And again, I repeat, Islam becomes secondary, at least in the development. Now we are, we have embraced orthodoxy in many ways, but we've embraced it from a uniquely African American perspective, right? But as we learn about the development, as we examine the development of African American Islam, Islam becomes secondary. It is the development of Black nationalism and Afrocentricity. So anyone interested in learning more about Afrocentricity or Black nationalism and its presentations in African American, in the African American community, you have to study Islam or African American Islam. There's no way around it. Like there's no way around studying Pan-African ideology without studying Marcus Garvey or Edward Blyden, right?
No, thank you. Thank you for that, Dr. Asad. Any other questions from the people that are joining us here on Zoom? Or comments, remarks?
I see one. How have African American Muslim scholars and activists contributed to the discussion surrounding Pan-Africanism and solidarity with African nations? Man, that's a heavy question, my brother Frank. So I mentioned briefly Edward Blyden. Edward Wilmot Blyden was an immigrant to the United States and eventually made his way to the continent of Africa and eventually embraced, I believe he he became president of a West African nation, and it's slipping my mind now. But he eventually embraced Islam, and he saw Islam as a way of unifying, much like we look at the Roman Catholic Church and the conversion of individuals to Catholicism as a way of creating a unifying religion. He looked at Islam as that unifying religion. However, I must say that African American Muslims in particular have been more of an isolated group. We recognize ourselves as Africans, right? And as I say, we talk about Afrocentricity. But because of our, I guess, condition in the United States, we have not done much to kind of move the Pan-African needle forward. I would say men like Louis Farrakhan, and after his 1995 Million Man March, he went on a friendship tour, and it brought him to Africa. But I think there's much more that the African American Muslim community should be doing as it relates to pushing the needle forward on Pan-Africanism. I think in many ways we have become complacent in our place in the United States, and that's quite unfortunate. That's quite unfortunate because I believe that the radical nature of Black Muslims, right? The radical nature is so needed in the discussion of Pan-Africanism. Any other questions? All right. Looks like we are out of here on time.
Yeah, no, it looks like we're done. No, thank you very much, Dr. Asad, for such an insightful presentation. Hoping that all people join us next week as well.
Absolutely. Well, tomorrow we have the sister from the National Council of Black Studies who will be presenting on African American women in popular culture. And that'll be a very powerful presentation to lead us right into Women's History Month. So I thank you all for tuning in, and I appreciate it greatly.
Cool. Thanks. Okay.